These films didn't fail, they were abandoned. How does a masterpiece collapse at the box office while mediocrity dominates the decade? In the 1980s, studios buried brilliance under bad marketing, wrong timing, and catastrophic misjudgments. Tonight, we're reopening 10 financial disasters that time has quietly redeemed. Some were too smart, some were too dark. One nearly ended a director's career, and Hollywood still hasn't admitted it was wrong. The Thing, 1982. In 1982, science fiction leaned toward reassurance, friendly visitors, emotional catharsis, hope packaged in spectacle. Then this arrived. Directed by John Carpenter, The Thing rejected warmth entirely. Set in an Antarctic outpost, it confined its characters inside wind, ice, and suspicion. Released only weeks after E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the tonal contrast was severe. Universal invested roughly $15 million. Domestic returns barely exceeded 19. The response was hostile. Critics described it as excessive, cynical, needlessly grotesque. The practical effects supervised by Rob Bottin were cited as indulgent. The violence felt unrelenting, but the design was precise. Carpenter constructed a closed system where trust erodes incrementally. There is no central hero, no speech that restores order. The threat is not simply an organism, it is imitation. Identity becomes unreliable. Authority collapses. What survival depends on suspicion? The horror is philosophical. Ennio Morricone's restrained score reinforces isolation rather than guiding emotion. The final scene refuses explanation. It ends not with victory, but stalemate. Audiences in 1982 sought resolution. The Thing provided ambiguity. Home video altered perception. Removed from opening weekend expectations, the film's atmosphere revealed discipline. Its effects, achieved without digital assistance, retained texture and tactility. Its paranoia aged alongside cultural distrust. It did not soften. It did not revise itself. Time recalibrated the audience instead. What was once labeled nihilistic is now considered one of the most structurally rigorous horror films ever made. It was not excessive. It was uncompromising. Blade Runner, 1982. It appeared polished, expensive, ambitious, and strangely distant. Directed by Ridley Scott, Blade Runner carried a production cost near $28 million, significant for 1982. Visually, it suggested scale and spectacle. Financially, its domestic performance underwhelmed. Studio executives grew uneasy with its ambiguity, mandating voice-over narration and a modified ending to provide clarity. The intervention diluted tone. Audiences expecting propulsion encountered meditation, a future soaked in neon and rain, replicants confronting mortality. A protagonist, uncertain of his own humanity. Instead of escalation, the film lingered. Critics acknowledged the production design, yet questioned emotional engagement. The pacing felt deliberate to some, inert to others. They misread intention. The cityscape became a blueprint for cyberpunk aesthetics. Industrial decay fused with corporate dominance, artificial life granted interiority. The film asked whether memory defines identity and whether empathy can be engineered. Whose subsequent director's cuts removed imposed narration and restored tonal cohesion. Without explanatory guidance, the film gained depth. Its melancholy clarified. Its philosophical undercurrent surfaced. What once seemed slow now appears patient. What once seemed confusing now feels layered. Opening weekend metrics labeled it a disappointment. Historical distance reframed it as architecture, a structural foundation for modern science fiction. It was not inaccessible. It was operating ahead of its audience's expectations. Time did not elevate it artificially. Time allowed it to be understood. The King of Comedy, 1982. Audiences wanted charisma. They got desperation. Martin Scorsese directed The King of Comedy at the peak of Robert De Niro's fame. Instead of another explosive anti-hero, De Niro delivered Rupert Pupkin, Awkward, delusional, painfully needy. The film cost roughly $19 million. That it earned barely a fraction domestically. The discomfort was deliberate. This wasn't satire played broad, it was clinical, a story about obsession and media validation long before reality television existed. No triumphant arc, no glamour. Rupert isn't charming, he's embarrassing. In 1982, that was unbearable. Today, it feels prophetic. Fame without merit, manufactured celebrity, public attention as currency. Its DNA runs through modern culture. Here, the film didn't bomb because it was flawed. It bombed because it told the truth too plainly. Heaven's Gate, 1980. This wasn't just a box office disappointment. It became an industry legend. Directed by Michael Cimino after his Oscar triumph with The Deer Hunter, Heaven's Gate began as a prestige Western and spiraled into something far larger. The budget expanded past $40 million, an extraordinary figure for 1980. Reports of endless takes, reconstructed sets, and delayed schedules circulated long before audiences saw a single frame. The press framed it as arrogance. By the time it premiered, the narrative was already written. Critics were harsh. The initial cut was withdrawn and shortened. Viewers stayed away. It grossed only a fraction of its cost and contributed to the collapse of United Artists as an independent force. But scandal eclipsed substance. Restored editions reveal a different film, expansive, painterly, mournful. Cimino constructed not a conventional Western, but an elegy about immigration, class violence, and the corrosion of the American dream. The pacing is deliberate. Scenes unfold with operatic patience, crowds move like choreography, landscapes dominate the human figures within them. It was not designed for weekend thrills, it was structured like historical lament. The failure became symbolic, shorthand for excess in Hollywood. Yet over decades, reassessment replaced ridicule. Cinematography, once mocked as indulgent, is now praised for precision. Its thematic ambition appears less reckless than misunderstood. The production was chaotic, the reputation was catastrophic. The film itself was measured, controlled, and thematically coherent. It didn't collapse because it lacked vision. It collapsed because the industry lost patience. Brazil, 1985. Studios prefer efficiency. Terry Gilliam prefers excess. Brazil emerged in 1985 as a dystopian satire disguised as science fiction. Produced for approximately $15 million, it delivered elaborate production design, bureaucratic absurdity, and a narrative that resisted simplification. Its commercial performance was modest, but the controversy surrounding it was not. Executives wanted a shorter cut, a brighter tone, a hopeful ending. Gilliam resisted publicly. The dispute became headline material. Competing edits circulated. The battle over the final version overshadowed the release itself. Marketing stalled. Audiences encountered confusion before context. What they received was not streamlined futurism. It was suffocating bureaucracy rendered as nightmare. Forms, ducks, paperwork, instruments of quiet oppression. Humor threaded through despair. Visual density in every frame. Mainstream viewers expecting linear adventure found fragmentation instead. At the time, its exaggeration felt theatrical. Now it feels documentary. The labyrinthine offices, the faceless institutions, the absurd logic of administration, they resonate more sharply decades later. The production design remains meticulous. The satire remains pointed. Repeated viewings reveal layers, irony nested inside tragedy, comedy masking systemic cruelty. It did not fail because it lacked craft. It faltered because it refused clarity. It demanded attention rather than offering comfort. And comfort, in 1985, was easier to sell. The Shining, 1980, it opened strong, and then the backlash began. Directed by Stanley Kubrick, The Shining carried prestige, a recognizable novel by Stephen King, and a rising star in Jack Nicholson. Financially, it wasn't a collapse, but critically, it was dismissed. Reviewers called it cold, mechanical, overlong. King publicly criticized it. Audiences expecting conventional scares encountered something slower, controlled, almost clinical. Kubrick stripped away sentiment and replaced it with geometry, symmetry, silence. The Overlook Hotel wasn't just haunted, it was oppressive architecture. The horror came from inevitability. Nicholson's performance felt exaggerated to some critics. Today it feels mythic. The Steadicam work changed how horror films moved. The ambiguity around the ending still fuels debate decades later. What hurt it in 1980 was expectation. It wasn't a haunted house ride. It was a study of psychological erosion. Over time, its coldness became its strength. Its distance became intentional. It didn't need immediate applause. It required patience. Once Upon a Time in America, 1984. The failure wasn't artistic. It was surgical. Directed by Sergio Leone, this epic crime saga originally ran nearly 4 hours. The studio cut it down, rearranged the nonlinear structure into chronological order, and released a mutilated version in the United States. Audiences were confused. Critics were indifferent. The film grossed only a fraction of its budget domestically, but the restored cut tells a different story. Leone's original vision unfolds as memory, fractured, unreliable, drifting through time. Robert De Niro anchors it with restraint, aging from hopeful street kid to haunted survivor. This wasn't a gangster thriller, it was a meditation on regret. In the studio's edit, stripped away its rhythm, its melancholy, its architecture, what remained felt incomplete. Decades later, the full version revealed a monumental achievement, operatic, patient, devastating. It didn't collapse because audiences rejected it. They were never shown the real film. The Mission, 1986, it won the Palme d'Or. It did not win the marketplace. Directed by Roland Joffé and anchored by Robert De Niro and Jeremy Irons, The Mission arrived with prestige attached. Period setting, moral gravity, international acclaim. On paper, it looked positioned for broad success. Instead, it met hesitation. Audiences expecting sweeping adventure found theological debate. Jesuit missionaries navigating colonial politics in 18th century South America, conversion, conscience, complicity. The conflict was internal before it was physical. Even the violence unfolds as inevitability rather than spectacle. Financially, its domestic performance was restrained compared to expectations. It wasn't rejected loudly, it simply failed to ignite. The film's force lies in restraint. De Niro plays a former mercenary seeking redemption not through grand speeches but through visible burden. Irons embodies faith without theatrics. And above it all, Ennio Morricone's score does what dialogue cannot, elevating moral struggle into something almost sacred. The camera lingers on waterfalls, on faces, on silence, not for indulgence, but for reflection. There is no conventional triumph, no rousing victory, only sacrifice shaped by political indifference. In 1986, mainstream audiences gravitated toward propulsion and clarity. The Mission offered meditation. Its reputation grew slowly. In universities, retrospectives, theological discussions, it became a reference point for cinema grappling with imperialism and faith. It did not dominate its moment. It outlived it. Blue Velvet, 1986. It begins with sunlight, white fences, trimmed lawns, a fire truck passing in ceremonial calm, then the camera tilts downward, beneath the grass, and something else is revealed. Directed by David Lynch, Blue Velvet arrived disguised as a mystery. Marketing suggested intrigue. What audiences encountered was excavation. Suburban America dissected under a surgical lens. Financially, it performed modestly, respectable numbers, but well below what studios hoped for given its cast and critical attention. The divide was immediate. Some critics praised its boldness. Others recoiled from its darkness. Lynch refused compromise. He constructed a tonal landscape where innocence and menace occupy the same frame. Dennis Hopper's performance was unstable by design, volatile, unpredictable, operating outside traditional villain archetypes. Scenes shifted without warning from dreamlike stillness to psychological threat. In 1986, that instability felt unsafe. Audiences accustomed to clearer moral boundaries found ambiguity unsettling. The film did not explain itself, it did not comfort. Instead, it dismantled the mythology of small-town purity. It suggested corruption wasn't an intrusion, it was foundational. Over time, its influence became visible. Independent filmmakers borrowed its tonal daring. Prestige television echoed its structure. Cultural discourse adopted its imagery. What once felt abrasive now reads as diagnostic. It wasn't engineered for approval, it was constructed for exposure. Princess Bride, 1987. It should have been easy, fantasy, romance, sword fights, comedy. Instead, it confused marketing departments. Directed by Rob Reiner, The Princess Bride earned modest returns but fell short of blockbuster expectations. Studios didn't know how to sell sincerity layered with irony. Was it for children? Adults? Both? Audiences hesitated. The film itself is precise. Dialogue sharp, performances restrained rather than exaggerated. It never winks too hard at the camera. It trusts the story. That restraint cost it immediacy. But repetition built affection, cable television, home video, quotation culture. The film grew not through spectacle, but through endurance. What once felt small became timeless. It didn't dominate opening weekend. It quietly became permanent. They were labeled disappointments, were written off in opening weekend headlines, but box office numbers measure timing, not legacy. The 1980s rewarded spectacle and clarity. These films offered ambiguity, patience, discomfort. Audiences hesitated, studios panicked, and history quietly corrected the record. The real question isn't why they failed, it's how many masterpieces are collapsing right now while we're busy counting receipts.